Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Anne. I'm from Moss Landing Marine Labs, which is a small consortium science campus up around Monterey. And I'm very lucky that USC to students from everywhere who would like to study in Catalina. This is a beautiful picture that I took last summer. I'm a continuing fellow, so my second summer of doing research out here. And I love this island so much that I decided I need to come back here and finding reasons to explore our kelp forests out here on Catalina Island. My two advisors, Dr. Mike Graham and Dr. Dana Speller, are also here, so I'm so excited that you guys are all here, that I can talk to you about seaweed and our kelp forests. But a little bit about myself before we get delved into the seaweed. I wasn't always in marine science before coming out here. I got my undergraduate degree from a combination of Colorado State University and Fort Collins, where I worked in rangeland, grassland habitats, and also James Cook University, where that's where I kind of took my first plunge into marine science. And after that, it was all underwater from there. When I graduated, I did some work for the National Park Service in Mexico, where I got to work with sea turtles. Sea turtles are real exciting creatures, not just old, big, beautiful, but they also are essential to a lot of tropical plant communities like seagrasses. And I also worked out here on the island for a number of years with a program called Kelp, the Catalina Environmental Leadership Program, where we worked with a lot of middle school and high school students, probably around the same age as some of our audience members today. And we took them hiking, snorkeling, kayaking, just tried to really get everyone out into the water and around the island to just see how beautiful the world could be and kind of just explore the science of the island. And a lot of the time when we're out here looking at the environment, a lot of times the question is, why are seaweed and algae important? Why are they so important that we named our whole program after them and use kelp as our signal for that program? And so today, a lot of times, who out here maybe likes to eat sushi or poke? Yeah, so we all kind of know now that seaweed is a great source of food, but it's actually a lot of other things we've been using every day that you might or may not be familiar with. For instance, it's in a lot of our salad dressing. If you've had coffee mate or some other creamers that are shelf life stable, there's this product in it called carrageenan. Can everyone say that with me? Carrageenan. Excellent. So carrageenan is a product that comes from seaweed that works as an emulsifier. It helps to make things thick and creamy. So you've probably all been eating seaweed every time you've had a bowl of delicious ice cream. It's also taken off in the cosmetics industry as well. So seaweed is something we see and use every day in our lives. But it's also very important to the environment. This is a lovely panoramic picture of a California kelp forest. And I love looking at this picture because you can just see the number of organisms and life that exist in our kelp forests. And you can see it's not just the kelp. There's all kinds of red seaweeds in here. There's a Gorgonian fan, which is kind of like a coral. There's sportfish that people love to eat, like sheephead, rockfish that survive on kelp forests. And I love looking at this picture because even one of the most famous scientists in the world recognized how great kelp is. If you've heard of maybe Darwin, he's the guy with all the lovely finches down the islands, origin of species. When he came around the side of South America, believe it or not, there's kelp down in South America, and he was looking at these kelp forests, and he wrote in his journals that he thought that if all of the kelp forests were to disappear, it would have more of magnitude on the diversity of life on this planet than if all of the rainforests. That's how much life and species rely on our beautiful kelp forests and are in our ocean. So, with that, why are we looking at kelp on the west end of Catalina? So these forests, we're here in kind of the heart of Big Fisherman's Cove. These little stars, we'll get to in a minute, those are the areas where I'm studying kelp. Now, if any of you have been in the water recently, or along the boat, you might have been seeing these large kelp patties around the island, and that's really awesome. A few years ago, we had this very so a few years ago, this is what all of our kelp looked like. And we still have some of those patches that are kind of coming up around the island. You can see it's green, there's some sea stars, some fish. And while I was working on Catalina Island, this is a picture of our cove from 2013. And then we had a couple of years where the water got a little warmer, some kind of weird things started to happen, and our cove went from looking like this down in Howland's Landing to this. This is what it looks like just a couple months ago. You can see we have a lot more light coming through the water. We also don't have quite as many organisms. And so that happened in 2014, 2015. And when I saw that happening, I wanted to know what's going on here. And we also started seeing some of this other kind of seaweed. For instance, in Big Fisherman's Cove, this is what it meant from being a kelp forest. Along that white side with all the chalk. This is what it looked like just after we got that warm water. Big difference, very big visible difference. And these tall, kind of bushy-looking seaweeds, this is a new species, or relatively new species, to California called Sargassum horneri. And that species kind of took advantage of all this light. But what happened that kind of made the big dramatic shift is we had a couple of years of some very interesting things happening in our ocean at a global level. So some of you might remember for 2014 we had something called the warm blob. So we had this very large warm patch of water occur in the Pacific and then pushed up against California. Now a lot of kelps, they all evolved in cold, nutrient-rich water. So just like us, if it's a very hot day, we get a little stressed out when it's very hot and we're trying to do things like, for instance, this morning it was kind of cloud covered and cold, so I bet that walk over was pretty pleasant. But you can imagine how that walk might not be so pleasant if it was 80, 90 degrees out. We'd feel a little stressed, a little tired. We also then had an El Niño cycle happen. So an El Niño is when this area of the Pacific around the equator is hotter than a long-term average by half a degree centigrade for a number of weeks and months. And the longer that occurs and the higher that above average temperature is, the more strength that El Niño is said to have. For instance, the 2015-2016 El Niño, the average was 1.5 degrees higher than average for almost a year, which is very unusual. Whereas right now we're in a weak El Niño where we're at about 0.2 to 0.5 degrees higher, and all it's doing for us is giving us a little bit of rain. So different El Niños can cause different things to happen in our ocean. This one was one of the strongest on record and is most comparable to one we had back in the 80s, 83, 84. So bit of anomaly, and we had two anomalies happen in a very short period of time. So you can imagine if you have multiple stressors happen to you, like if you're in school, for instance, let's say you have 2 or 3 tests on a big day, all in one day, you're going to be really stressed out and really freaking about all of those tests. Versus if you only have one test and it's spread out away from maybe a project or other things, you're probably going to have time to study and feel pretty good about that. So just like we get stressed, our oceans can get stressed as well. And so an added stressor to that temperature that was making it hard for our kelp to stick around was this new invasive species. So the Sargassum horneri is originally from the Western Pacific up around China and the East China Sea. We think it came over in the early 2000s, around 2003, in the ballast water and on container ships. And it just took all these little spots that it was like, oh, there's enough light over here, there's enough nutrients over here. Oh, no fish, no snails are eating me. Great, I will just go nuts and go everywhere. Kind of like if you have like dandelions in your lawn and you don't take care of them, so to speak, they will just spread and take over your whole lawn. So this species is a little bit different than our kelp. It can grow differently. It's a little bushier. It also is an annual with a different kind of life history. And we're going to get a little bit more into that because those two kinds of life histories might be causing what we're seeing to happen in our kelp forests today. All right, so we still have a lot of S. horneri around. We have some areas where there is kelp coming back, but it's still not nearly at the density as it was before that El Niño. So why is our kelp taking so long, and why is this one particular species so successful? Well, when it comes to seaweed, just like it comes to plants in our garden, there's lots of things that can be helping it out. We could go for things like temperature, how much free space there are. Is anything eating it? Is anything maybe helping propagate its spores or seeds if you're looking for a plant equivalent. Also, we started doing things like marine protected areas. Maybe those are playing a factor on where things are happening. So there's lots and lots of questions out there. Since I'm a student and I would like to graduate one day, I only decided to focus on 2 of these, which is looking at how temperature impacts these 2 species and how the timing of their reproduction and their reproductive life histories allow them to propagate, and if that's putting them into conflict and competition in any sort of way. All right, so these have 2 very different ways of going about it. And the kind of 2 big things you need to know is that kelp is a perennial, and it has 2 stages to its life history, whereas sargassum is an annual, and it reproduces a little bit more like a land plant. And to kind of give you some visuals on that, this is a doodle of macrocystis. So the big, beautiful kelp that we see floating around the harbor or that we see on the shores is this part. And this is what we call a sporophyte. And just like you and us, where it's 2N or it's diploid, which means it has 2 sets of genetics from 2 parents. And what it does is it makes these specialized blades at the bottom that release spores. Now these spores only have half the genetic material to make a new plant. Part of it is if you only had half the Legos kit to make something new. That's the way I like to think about cells. It's kind of like Legos. And so those spores go out and they settle on the bottom of the ocean, and they grow to either make an egg or a sperm. And then those will then go out in the ocean and find each other and make a new little kelp. Now, the problem is that both this and this are vulnerable to environments just like this is. You can imagine if you're a big multicellular creature like this, you have a lot less to worry about than these little guys. And so they come together, they grow, they get this cute little blade, and then they just start growing and going nuts. Now, sargassum, on the other hand, they have everything they need to reproduce on one individual itself. So they look kind of like a bushy fern, and they get these little chili pepper pieces of tissue that are called receptacles. And on those, they have these little pits. And in each little pit, they have both eggs and sperm. Now, ideally, the sperm will get released and go to a different individual. But if worse comes to worse and there's only one individual, it can actually reproduce with itself to make a zygote. And that zygote has everything it needs to start growing as soon as it hits the ocean floor. However, our kelp, because they are much bigger, they can persist throughout a whole year. These guys tend to only are quick to grow, quick to reproduce, and then this individual will pass away or die off. However, Catalina has such nice, wonderful water. We are finding that these can stick around in multiple cohorts. So I've been finding reproductive individuals, for instance, from January all the way through June, which is almost 6 months out of the year. So that's still a very large window for these to drop their zygotes and to give our kelp some competition. All right, so what I'm doing with my research is I want to know how the populations are doing. I want to know how much adult kelp to juvenile kelp there is, how many adult to baby sargassum there are, and what does this look like over the course of the year. And with that, I can then start asking questions of when are the big reproductive peaks? Because let's say the kelp gets its spores out there, its seeds out there way before the sargassum, it might have a really good fighting chance. Otherwise, but if the sargassum's putting its stuff out there, it might take the space that our kelp needs. And so I'm trying to figure out how are those 2 things interacting over the course of a year. And then I'm also collecting these reproductive tissues to try and figure out, like, what is the stages? Like, what are some of the relationships between daylight, temperature that are related to when these are at their peak reproductive ability. And then lastly, how does temperature influence these? If they're both reproducing at the same time and we have another hot spike or a heat wave, will that mean the sargassum always wins? If it goes colder again, will that mean the kelp always wins? And so I'm doing a lab experiment to try and see how these 2 species interact at that microscopic level as well. All right, so what I've been doing for the past year, I started last June, as I've been coming out here every month and doing transects. So what that means is I've been taking measuring tape, going through the kelp forest and counting every kelp within a meter at either side of the transect, so about like my arm is going down, and then taking random spots and sampling how many sargassum there are and separating those to adults versus juveniles. I've also been measuring the biomass, or how much stuff there is for each of those species for the sargassum, because it's an invasive species and we don't really want it here. I'm able to collect the whole plant and weigh it. For kelp, because I want to keep the kelp, I've been just doing a series of measurements and then figuring out how much kelp there is based on those measurements, kelp in the water, and then I get to check on those plants every month. And then with that, I could grab just a little bit of reproductive tissue, just a couple of these specialized blades at the bottom, to figure out how reproductive that individual is. Now, because this particular biomass hasn't happened on Catalina before or recently, I had to do a lot of work to figure out how much does a kelp plant weigh if I can't take it out of the water. So last summer, the main focus of my research out here was collecting drift kelp and a lot of fronds, and measuring them and then putting them on a scale and weighing them. And I did this all with a kayak, which is pretty fun because you get to go out there early in the morning and see what the island is up to, but it also means you get covered in lots of lovely kelp slime. I highly encourage you to try it. It's wonderful. And then I would bring them all back. I'd sort them all out. And then when I was done with this, a lot of this got to go feed our critters in the touch tanks that you get in the aquariums that you get there. And the result of this was I was able to come up with a pretty good equation to relate the length of the kelp to the weight of the kelp. And it ended up being a little over 300 pounds of kelp and 208 fronds. And I was able to get this line. And so now if I can calculate the length and number of fronds on my kelp in the water, I can just plug that into this equation and it will tell me how much that individual kelp weighs. Pretty cool. So along with that, here's some of the reproductive tissue. So with these, I would collect the sporicles, which are those specialized blades at the bottom of the kelp. And then the blades of the sargassum you can see kind of here the little chili pepper reproductive nodes. And with those, what you can do is you can, if you stress kelp out, even if it's not attached to the main adult plant anymore, it'll, instead of shutting down completely, it'll instead say, oh my God, things are going bad. I need to get rid of all of my seeds, all of my babies right now, which is really great for scientists. So what you do is you take these, you clean them with a little bit of salt water, a little bit of iodine, you pack them in wet paper towel and layer them. It's what we call seaweed lasagna. You don't want to eat it, but it still looks pretty cool. And then you bubble them in some more salt water for a couple of days, and then add it to some petri dishes, give it some light, give it some nutrients, and you have baby kelp and baby sargassum. And this is what they look like under the microscope. So they go from the petri dishes, and I've been taking pictures of them to monitor their growth and how well they're surviving at different temperatures. So this is what baby kelp looks like. Oh, it's so cute. So these are those microscopic stages that were in that doodle. You can see they kind of look a little bit like weird cell spaghetti. And over time, and this is taken at a much higher magnitude than the rest of these pictures. You can see if you zoom out how small they are if you're kelp compared to one sargassum. So a huge difference. And over the course of a few weeks, this sargassum goes from being just this one little enclosed seed to it starts growing little root-like structures called rhizoids. They get a little bigger, and then it starts to grow its first blade. You can see that it can the blade can either narrow before it gets fat, or it'll just keep growing out. And these roots, you can see, go all the way out here. So over the course of 3 weeks, it might take kelp to make that egg and sperm. The sargassum can be essentially ready to go and start growing upwards from the same dish. So and this is all from a higher temperature treatment. Lower temperature, it gets a little funky, but I know you guys want to see more in the lab, so I'm not going to keep you here all day going into all of the pictures for my stuff. But just it just kind of is a good encapsulation of how they have very different ways of growing, and temperature is playing a little bit into that. All right, so what does that mean for this summer? So I'm still have a few months left of sampling and doing transects. So this is kind of more what that looks like underwater, following like through the sargassum thicket. And you can see there's like little fish. You get to see a lot of little fish. And there's another student who will be giving her talk later in the summer that talks about the difference of the fish between sargassum and the kelp. You can see this is how big it can get for scale, and then this is what the little babies look like. But along with seeing all the kelp, it's really fantastic to be out here to see all the other wildlife. Of the wildlife you can see both on land and in the water. If you take some time and slow down, you can see all kinds of things like different snails, the squirrels, the foxes. So definitely, whether you're in the water or out of it, slow down, enjoy it, make some observations, kind of try to see if you can figure out why nature is doing what it does. All right, so with that, I'm going to let you guys start moving. I'll be starting to open it up for questions. I want to thank the USD Wrigley staff, both the support staff and all the lab staff. They really take fantastic care of us out here. Coming out here in all seasons, even when the weather's been rather stormy, they've helped me get boats. They've helped me find vehicles in some of the weirdest ways and conditions. The other Wrigley Fellows, we all help each other out with our fieldwork and sampling. I've had a lot of help from my advisors. My lab is nicknamed the Beer Pigs Lab Group. It stands for Benthic Ecology and Environmental Research and Psychology in general. So it's a fun acronym. And I have had so much help from so many lab mates and volunteers that have been coming out here because just like when you're swimming, when you're scuba diving, you never dive alone. You have to have friends and family to help you with science and research. And with that, I'll open it up to questions. Thank you so much for coming and listening to my talk. Yes.
How long does it take the good kelp to grow like a foot?
So it depends on light and nutrients, but if you have perfect light and nutrients, kelp Macrocystis perifera can grow about 2 feet a day. Some people say up to a meter a day, so it just depends. So once it gets established, it can just keep growing. Yes?
So if all the kelp in the world disappears, what would happen?
All the kelp in the world disappears, we would have a lot of very sad fish and a lot of very sad people. Because if you don't have fish, people get sad.
Yes. In the pictures with the water, does it actually look like that now?
It depends on where you are. So those pictures were all taken at a couple spots. Out here in Big Fisherman's Cove, we have one spot just around the corner where we get our intake seawater, and it's actually changed really crazily. So that first picture with all the kelp, that's what it looked like last summer. This summer, there's kelp, but there's also this bed of sargassum underneath it. And so it's constantly changing, which for me is really interesting and fascinating. And there's other spots where it was all sargassum last summer that now I'm seeing kelp come back. So there's things changing, things happening. Right, yes.
Sorry. So in that cove right there, can you find leopard sharks and sea
You sometimes can. I don't know if there's any leopard sharks right now, but I have seen leopard sharks here. I've also seen them in the sandy area by the campground. Right. Yes, little dude.
Why do fish like water?
Why do fish do what with water?
Like that. Like water.
Like water? Well, they use water to breathe, just like we use air to breathe. So just like we like our air, the fish like their water. Good question.
So you know how we can plant trees and we plant the seaweed in the water?
Yes, there's actually some folks working on that in different ways. We have a group here that's working on something called the Kelp Elevator Project, and they're looking at ways to grow seaweed. There's other researchers that are looking at something called spore bags, where they take the sporophylls or those reproductive blades, you put them in something like a nylon tight, and you just anchor them out in an area that you want to kelp, and then just through the movement of the ocean, they will release their spores, and then hopefully you get baby kelp. What's really cool about those kelp drift patties as well, you might see around, if those have sporophylls in them, they're dropping spores all along the way as they're drifting. So drift kelp, or if you see kelp washing up on seaweed, that's a really good sign, because it means they're probably helping repopulate it along the shore.
Can you move those drift kelps to areas where you want to grow seaweed?
Yes, but you need a permit. Like,
Government gets involved.
Most likely, if you were doing it in an official large capacity, but if you see some kelp or sporophylls, just throw it back in the water. Something will love to have that kelp.
is the like getting rid of the kelp?
That's kind of the big question. We don't know if the sargassum is kind of extirpating the kelp or if it just happened to be a species that was in the right place at the right time. That really warm water having really warm water for 3 years was really stressful on the kelp, and so that reduced how much space it was taking up because it couldn't handle the stress. There was all this free space, and so the sargassum might have just taken over that free space, or it might just be that it was able to outcompete for that and kind of take over for those couple of years because it was better. So we don't really know, and that's why a lot of people are looking at these different aspects to try and figure that out. It's a great question.
As the waters get colder, does the sargassum disappear or does it stay?
We don't know yet. What we do know is that a relative of sargassum, or this particular type of sargassum, in the 80s came in, and we had a very strong La Niña, which is colder than usual water, and that seemed to knock it back. The kelp came out, and we still have that species around, but it's now a smaller population just in the understory, and it's not causing issues the way this sargassum. So it's possible. I think I saw your hand, and then, yeah.
How many years has kelp been around?
Oh my goodness. How many years has kelp been around?
As old as you
It
Easy.
I know that they found fossils with kelp in it, so very, very long. I can look that up and come find you guys at the type and tell you, because it's very old. There's three kind of big groups for seaweed: red, green, and brown. Very, very clever, very easy to remember. And browns are one of the younger groups of seaweed, but that still is way older than any of us.
It says 5 to 23 million years. That's very broad. But.
Yeah, but very broad, but 5. Thank you. Right, I saw. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Does that really outsized El Nino happen with like a 30-year pattern? Because you said 80s and then 2014.
Yeah, it's very hard to tell. A lot of physical oceanography, we've only have records going back to maybe the 30s or so. So we have this very short time period for those long-term sets to know and look at these patterns. And also, as our oceans change, these patterns that we think we've been seeing change. For instance, typically any type of El Nino is on a 5 to 7 year cycle, but here it is only 2.5 years later, and we're back into another El Nino cycle, albeit a weak one. But that still is a lot quicker and a lot closer together than what has typically been observed. All right, can I get this question look over you? All right.
Are there jellyfish?
There can be jellyfish. I've seen a few jellyfish out here. I don't see them very often, and they're really pretty. I see the purple striped ones, and these ones called lion's mane because they have lots of frilly tentacles, and once in a while, a fried egg, which looks exactly like a fried egg, like if you were to put an egg in a pan. That's it. I'll save those wildlife questions because I know some of these lovely ladies would love to answer them.
Are they finding similar amounts of sargassum in the other Channel Islands?
I know during the El Nino they were seeing the same pattern across the
This is a
Channel
lot
Islands.
worse here than the other ones. I noticed.
Yeah. I know here they've been seeing similar patterns. I don't know about the recovery patterns, if they've been seeing the kelp come back there, but I know there was a paper released that was saying that areas that had marine protected areas, or MPAs, were showing greater resilience and were showing greater kelp recovery than areas without those protections. And they think it's because lots of things love to eat and live in the kelp. And so if the kelp is stressed, it's reduced by the population, by the temperature or the storms, but you still have things eating it. That's yet another stress. And things don't really like to eat the sargassum. It's new, it's weird, it's prickly, it's slimy. It's just not very, very fun. And so that kind of plays into those. But I know there's lots of people monitoring it, just trying to figure out what's going on. So hopefully, I don't know. I know at one point we kind of batted around the idea of like, oh, let's just all chit chat about sargassum. So maybe we'll be able to do that next few years and find out.
So does the sargassum, does the cold water affect it?
We don't know. We know that from the area it's from, that they're very similarly climate-wise to a lot of spots in California, based on what happened in the 80s with its cousin species. That would be the idea. So if we did get a really strong La Nina, we could see what happens and then see how that nice cold water push to see if that would knock it back at all.
How much does the light and shade affect it?
So much. If we had a day like this, a day of darkness doesn't necessarily change the whole system, but we do know that as you go down the slope of the island, so if you were to look at the slope of going from like the intertidal to the shallows, 20 feet to 40 feet to 30 feet, if you look through that ear, even just in a small area, you can see how much the seaweed and the invertebrates change. And a lot of that has to do with light, because seaweed, like plants, need light in order to make their sugars and grow and all those things. So there's this really nice sweet spot between where you have the wave, kind of the wash wave zone, and 40, 45 feet where you have lots of light. And then after that, you start to lose light, just because as you go deeper in the water, the light just can't penetrate as far. And so an area at 50, 60 feet, you're going to have a very different seaweed community than at 5 feet. So if you get a chance to walk through the intertidal, definitely check it out and see what you can see there, and maybe compare it to some of the different things you might see on like Blue Planet. You can kind of get a sense for how different and wild the different areas of the ocean.
We have time for one more question.
Okay, I haven't heard from you yet. So
Does kelp ever die?
it does. It can die from too much being eaten too much. It can die if it's like in that microscopic stage. If it gets overshaded, so like it goes for like weeks and weeks with no light, then it can die. It also, just like us, can die of old age. But because it has such an incredible ability to grow once it gets established, it can last a lot longer than that single season the way sargassum does.
Thank you so much.